Okay, would you introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is George Crocker. I'm the Executive
Talk
Director
loud.
of the North American Water Office, which is a nonprofit that my wife and I co-founded in 1982. As a result of work that we've been doing, actually it grew out of a big power line fight across west central Minnesota. So ever since then, we've been working on the relationship between energy development, the environment, economic development, and public health, social justice issues. How do those issues fit together or not as society goes about making decisions on how to provide energy services? And so that's involved a whole lot of just public organizing and educating. It's involved intervening in a wide variety of administrative and judicial proceedings and legislation, in direct intervention with the electric utilities and electric utility executives, all with the intent of accelerating the penetration of the modern technologies and the expeditious retirement of the obsolete central station machines that are causing so much trouble in terms of acid rain and global warming and particulate contamination and nuclear contamination and mercury contamination and all of this other social disparities that come from it, the inequities that are built in to centralized economic operations. And so with that in mind, perhaps a good place to start is the fact that in 1978, why Congress passed what they called the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act, PURPA. And what PURPA required was that electric utilities they were required to purchase energy from what they called qualifying facilities, which were renewable energy projects that were less than 80 megawatts. It's essentially what was the requirement. So if you had a qualifying facility that produced clean power from renewable sources at less than 80 megawatts, the power company, the regulated monopoly power company, was required to purchase power from your facility. And that was in the wake of, maybe you remember Jimmy Carter sitting with his sweater on and urging everybody to get to deprive themselves and become more conservative of energy and all of that. Well, the utilities didn't like that idea too much, and it was 10 years of litigation before it became fully ensconced in statute, but it did. And then the fight was on. Okay, there was a requirement to purchase, but at what price? And so the utilities settled on, the law said at the avoided cost. So the fight was over what is the avoided cost of power. And the utilities made the argument and made it stick that the avoided cost was essentially the value of the fuel that they did not burn in their existing generation facilities. That amounts to maybe a penny and a half, or at the most 2 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity, which is not enough to cash flow almost anything, which is why we have almost no PURPA projects in operation, despite the fact that we've got 30 years now or so of a requirement to purchase. Well, so that's the problem, but that sort of sets the stage, because maybe you remember in the late 1990s, there was competition that was injected into electric utility markets. There was all of the independent power producers started to come online with the Enron. Remember the Enron and all of the rolling blackouts that we had in California, because independent power producers were now allowed to put power into the grid, and there was huge disruptions and huge disparities and massive corruption that accompanied that. But one of the things that it did was begin to inject competition into the energy marketplace. And over time, that competition evolved into what eventually became and is now a quite mature and sophisticated wholesale market across the country. Now, some jurisdictions allow for retail competition, many don't, but throughout the country, now we have wholesale competition, which means that if I own a power plant, why I have the right to bid into the marketplace at the price that I can afford to produce my power. And if my bid into the marketplace is lower than the going price of power at any point in time, I get to play. And the entity that decides what the market price is called the independent system operators. There's 6 or 7 of them around the country. California has one. We're in the MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator, which is a big footprint from Indiana to the other side of Dakota, up into Canada, south into Missouri, maybe even a little further south. There's several on the eastern seaboard. But these independent power operators, these ISOs, are the ones that run the grid. They operate the transmission system, and they are the ones that accept these bids that all of the utilities, even the regulated monopolies, they bid in their power. The regulated monopolies can bid it in such a way that they are virtually assured. They are assured that their bids will be competitive, and so they're essentially on anyway, just like they would ordinarily be. But if I'm an independent producer and I'm bidding power at $50 a megawatt hour, which translates roughly to 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and the price of power is anything higher than that, what I get to put my power to the market because I'm competitive. That's what a market is. If you're cost competitive in the market, you get to play. If your price is too high, you can't play because your price is too high. And so then I'd have to curtail my generation. If the price during the low duration curve, if the price dropped below that 5 cents per kilowatt hour, I'd have to cease production because I'm no longer competitive. So the low duration curve is simply reflective of the fact that as people wake up in the morning where they start to use more power, that power consumption continues through the day and then it tapers off again at night when people go to sleep. We're always using power, some amount of power, all of the time. So if you draw a line at that point in the low duration curve below which power is stable, that's the base load. So in the conventional market, electric utility